with us if you want to read about some interesting ghost stories. Let's get started. A voice from beyond the grave. Following the murder of Teresita Basa in the late 1970s, another woman began to speak in Basa's voice, recounting things that only Teresita could have known to help solve the mystery of her murder. In February 1977, firemen broke into a burning apartment on North Pine Grove Avenue in Chicago. Beneath a pile of burning clothes, they found the naked body of a 47-year-old Teresita Basa, a hospital worker who was said to be a member of the Filipino aristocracy. There were bruises on her neck and a kitchen knife embedded in her chest. Her body was in a position that caused the police to suspect that she had been raped. However, an autopsy revealed that she hadn't been. In fact, she was a virgin. Police were left without a single lead. They had no suspects and no apparent motive for the brutal murder. The solution would come from the strangest of all possible sources, a voice from beyond the grave. I am Teresita Basa. In the nearby suburb of Evanston, shortly after Teresita's death, Remedios Chua started going into trances, during which she spoke in Tagalog in a slow, clear voice that said, I am Teresita Basa. Although Remedios had worked at the same hospital as Teresita, they worked different shifts, and the only time they are known to have even crossed paths was during a new employee orientation. Remedios' husband, Dr. Jose Chua, had never heard of Basa. While speaking in Teresita's voice, Remedios' accent changed, and when she awoke from the trances, she remembered very little, if anything, about what she had said. However, while speaking in that mysterious voice, she claimed that Teresita's killer was Alan Showery, an employee at the hospital where both women had worked. She also stated that he had killed her while stealing jewelry for rent money. Though Remedios' lips, the voice pleaded for them to contact the police. The frightened couple initially resisted, fearing that the authorities would think that they should be locked away. But when the voice returned and continued pleading for an investigation, the Chuas finally contacted the Evanston police, who put them in touch with Joe Statula, a criminal investigator for the Chicago Police Department. Lacking any other clues, Statula interviewed the Chuas. During their conversation, Remedios not only named the killer, but she also told Statula exactly where to find the jewelry that Showery had allegedly stolen from Teresita. Prior to that, the police were not even aware that anything had been taken from the apartment. Remarkably, when police began investigating Showery, they found his girlfriend in possession of Teresita's jewelry. Although the authorities declined to list the voice from beyond the grave as evidence, Showery was arrested and he initially confessed to the crime. When his lawyers learned that information prosecution argued that no matter the origin of the voice, it had turned out to be correct. In his closing remarks, prosecuting attorney Thomas Organ said, "Did Teresita Pasa come back from the dead and name Showery? I don't know. I'm a skeptic, but it doesn't matter as to guilt or innocence. What does matter is that the information furnished to police checked out. The jewelry was found where the voice said it would be found, and Showery confessed." Detective Statula was later asked if he believed the Chuas. "I would not call anyone a liar," he carefully stated. "Dr. and Mrs. Chua are educated, intelligent people. I listened and acted on what they told me, and the case was wrapped up within 3 hours." Showery told the jury that he was just kidding when he confessed to the crime. He also claimed that the police had coerced him into an admission of guilt. Nevertheless, after 13 hours of deliberation, the jury reported that they were hopelessly deadlocked, and a mistrial was declared. A few weeks later, in a shocking development, Alan Showery changed his plea to guilty and was eventually sentenced to 14 years in prison. Some say that Teresita's ghost had visited him and frightened him into confessing. Obviously shaken by the experience, the Chuas avoided the press as much as possible. In 1980, in her only interview with the press, Remedios noted that during the trial, people were afraid to ride in cars with her, but she said that she was never afraid because the voice said that God would protect her family. Still, she hoped that she would never have to go through such an experience again. "I've done my job," she said. "I don't think I will ever want to go through this same ordeal." Having attracted national attention, the case quickly became the subject of a best-selling book and countless magazine articles, a TV movie, and a 1990 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. The case is often cited as proof of psychic phenomena, possession, and ghosts, but it's simply another mystery of the paranormal world. Exactly what it proves is impossible to say. After all, the ghost of Teresita Pasa is no longer talking. Riddles of the Riddle House. While functioning as a cemetery caretaker's home, West Palm Beach's Riddle House was always close to death. Since then, it's been relocated and repurposed, and now it sees its fair share of life. Life after death, that is. The Painted Lady. Built in 1905 as a gatekeeper's cottage, this pretty painted lady seemed incongruent with the cemetery it was constructed to oversee. Cloaked in grand Victorian finery, the house radiated the brightness of life. Perhaps that's what was intended. A cemetery caretaker's duties can be gloomy, so it was placed on permanent display as an attractive token of days long past. There, too, its dark side would return with a vengeance. When workers began to reassemble the Riddle House, freshly awakened spirits kicked their antics into high gear. Ladders were tipped over, windows were smashed, and tools were thrown to the ground from the building's third floor. Workers were shocked when an unseen force threw a wooden board across a room, striking a carpenter in the head. The attacks were blamed on the spirit of Joseph, and the situation became so dangerous that work on the structure was halted for 6 months. After that, however, the Riddle House was restored to its previous glory. Ghostly unveiling. During the dedication of the Riddle House in the early 1980s, 2 unexpected guests showed up for the ceremony. Resplendent in Victorian garb, the couple added authenticity to the time period being celebrated. Many assumed that they were actors who were hired for the occasion. They were not. In fact, no one knew who they were. A few weeks later, century-old photos from the Riddle House were put on display. There, in sepia tones, stood the very same couple that guests had encountered during the dedication. When the Ghost Adventures team spent a night locked inside the Riddle House in 2008, a medium warned the investigators that the spirit of Joseph is an evil entity that did not want them there. But that didn't stop investigator Zach Baggins from provoking the spirit. Baggins left a board at the top of the stairs and asked the entity to move it if it didn't want them there. Later, after the team heard footsteps in the room above them, the board fell down several stairs on its own. Throughout the course of the night, the team experienced unexplained noises and objects moving and falling by themselves. In the end, the researchers concluded that the Riddle House is definitely haunted, and that whatever resides in the attic does not like men in particular, just as the medium had cautioned. Ethereal stirrings at the Riddle House continue to this day. Unexplained sightings of a torso hanging in the attic window represent only part of the horror. And if history is any indicator, more supernatural sightings and activity are to come. McRaven House, the most haunted house in Dixie. Located near Vicksburg, Mississippi, the McRaven House was haunted even before it became a Civil War hospital. The oldest parts of the estate, known as McRaven House, were built in 1797. Over the next 40 years, its owners gradually added to the property until it became a classic southern mansion, standing proudly among the magnolia blossoms and dogwood trees of the Old South. And like nearly all such mansions, it has its share of resident ghosts. Today, McRaven House is often referred to as the most haunted house in Mississippi. Some researchers believe that environmental conditions on the property make it particularly susceptible to hauntings. Ghosts that may not be noticeable in drier, less humid climates seem to be when General Ulysses S. Grant and his Union forces crossed the Tennessee River into Mississippi, Confederate forces retreated into Vicksburg, which was so well guarded that it was known as a fortress city. But as more and more Union forces gathered in the forests and swamps around Vicksburg, Confederate General John C. Pemberton was advised to evacuate. Fearing the wrath of the local population if he abandoned them, Pemberton refused. By the time the siege began in earnest, the Confederate troops were significantly outnumbered. Weary rebel forces surrendered the city of Vicksburg on July 4th, 1863, after more than a month of hard fighting. Nearly all of the Confederate soldiers involved in the battle, around 33,000 in all, were captured, wounded, or killed. The Union victory put the entire Mississippi River in Northern hands, and combined with the victory at Gettysburg that same week, it signaled the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Captain McPherson's last report. In the middle of the action stood McRaven House. In the early days of the siege, it served as a Confederate hospital, and at that time, it was full of the screams of anguished and dying men. Cannons from both armies shot at the mansion, destroying large portions of it. Later, after Union forces captured the house, it served as the headquarters for General Grant and the Union Army. One of the officers put in charge of the house was Captain McPherson, a Vicksburg native who had fled to the north to fight for the Union. At some point during the siege, he disappeared. Soon after, according to legend, McPherson's commanding officer awoke to find the captain in his room. He was furious at the intrusion until he noticed McPherson's mangled, bloody face and torn uniform. The commanding officer then realized that this was not actually McPherson himself. It was his ghost, which had returned to deliver the message that rebels, who couldn't forgive him for abandoning the South, had murdered him. McPherson's ghost reputedly still wanders the grounds, dressed in Union blue, with blood oozing from a bullet wound in his forehead. Other Civil War ghosts. Nearly a year after the siege ended, John Bobb, the owner of McRaven House at the time, spotted 6 Union soldiers picking flowers in his garden. Outraged by the trespassers, Bob threw a brick at them and hit one of the Yankees in the head. After going to the local field commander to report the intruders, Bob returned home to find 25 Union soldiers waiting for him. They marched him into the nearby bayou and shot him to death. His ghost has been seen roaming the property ever since. The war ended, but the ghosts kept coming. Mary Elizabeth and the Civil War era ghosts aren't the only spirits that haunt McRaven House. In 1882, William Murray purchased the home are simply odd blobs of light, but others appear to be human-shaped forms. Few argue with the claim that McRaven House is the most haunted house in Mississippi. In fact, some even call it the most haunted house in Dixie. The worried husband. "You never pay any attention to me," is a common lament heard in marriages when a person feels neglected by his or her partner. But what about the opposite situation, when a person's concern for his or her spouse extends beyond the grave? In the late 1940s, Elaine and her husband lived in an apartment in Oskaloosa, Iowa. They shared the floor with a single woman named Patricia, whose husband had died in an industrial accident. The devastated young woman had moved there to try to regroup. One evening, while her husband was working, Elaine decided to take a bath. Just as she was about to turn on the bathroom light, she smelled pipe smoke and then saw a young man with black hair and a horseshoe-shaped scar on his cheek. He was holding a pipe. After a moment, Elaine realized that the man was not really looking at her. He was sort of looking through her. She then deducted that the man was a ghost. Elaine watched as he began to move through her apartment. She followed him as he glided down the hall toward Patricia's apartment. When he got to Patricia's door, he vanished. Uncertain of what she was doing, Elaine turned the doorknob to her neighbor's apartment. It was unlocked, so Elaine went inside. There, she found Patricia lying on her bed, barely alive. She had slashed her wrists, and her lifeblood was quickly draining away. Elaine bandaged Patricia as best she could and called her husband. He raced home with a doctor who treated Patricia's injuries. The next day, Patricia thanked Elaine for saving her life. She said that she had been deeply saddened by her husband's death and had turned to the bottle as a result. Overcome by grief, the idea of joining her husband seemed appealing to her, so she had slit her wrists. If it had not been for Elaine, her plan would have succeeded. Elaine said nothing about why she had entered Patricia's apartment in the first place, but when Patricia showed Elaine a picture of her late husband, everything suddenly made sense. The man in the photo was the same man whom Elaine had seen in her apartment. Bobby Mackey's Ghosts That Like Country Music. unspeakable crime. On February 1st, 1896, the headless body of Pearl Bryan was found less than 2 miles from the site of the former slaughterhouse. It was later discovered that Bryan's boyfriend, Scott Jackson, and his friend, Alonzo Walling, had murdered her after a botched abortion attempt. The 2 men were arrested, but they refused to reveal the location of Bryan's head. Both men were hanged for the crime in March 1897 without ever disclosing the location of Bryan's head. The consensus was that the head was probably thrown into the old slaughterhouse well. Perhaps that's why Pearl Bryan's ghost is seen wandering around inside Bobby Mackey's, both with and without her head. And although Jackson and Walling did not take their last breaths on the property, it is believed that their ghosts are stuck there too. They have both been seen throughout the building, but Jackson's ghost seems to be more active and angry. Those who have encountered his ghost, usually around the well in the basement, say that it is a dark and unhappy spirit. Gangsters and unsolved murders. Shortly after the executions of Jackson and Walling, the former slaughterhouse was torn down, leaving only the well. In the 1920s, the building now known as Bobby Mackey's was built on the property directly over the well. During Prohibition, it functioned as a ruthless speakeasy and gambling den where several people lost their lives. Eventually, the building was shut down and cleared out, presumably of everything except the restless spirits. In 1933, after Prohibition was lifted, E.A. Buck Brady purchased the building and renamed it the Primrose. Brady was competing with powerful gangsters who began showing up at the Primrose, trying to scare him into giving them a cut of the profits. But Brady refused to be intimidated and continually turned them down. All this came to a head on August 5th, 1946, when Brady and gangster Albert Red Masterson were involved in a shootout. After that, Brady decided that he was done. After many years of having to continually and often forcibly reject advances by Cincinnati area gangsters, Brady sold the building. But if the stories are to be believed, as he handed over the keys, he cursed the building, saying that because he couldn't run a successful business there, no one should. Today, the ghosts of both Buck Brady and Red Masterson are seen inside Bobby Mackey's. Brady's ghost has been identified from photographs taken of him while he was alive. And even though he cursed the building, his ghost seems harmless enough. Masterson's ghost, on the other hand, has been described as not friendly and has been blamed for some of the alleged attacks on bar patrons. Joanna. After Brady sold the building, it reopened as the Latin Quarter. According to legend, Joanna, the daughter of the Latin Quarter's owner, fell in love with and became pregnant by Robert Randall, one of the musicians at the nightclub. After Joanna's father found out about the pregnancy, he ordered Randall killed. When Joanna learned of her father's involvement in her boyfriend's ghost is seen throughout the building, but it is more often reported on the top floor and in the stairwells, where she will either push or hug people. She is also said to hang out in the spotlight room, a secret place in the attic where she allegedly wrote a poem on the wall before committing suicide. Even those who cannot see her apparition can always tell that Joanna is around by the scent of roses. One of the strangest phenomena attributed to Joanna's ghost is that the turned off and unplugged jukebox sometimes springs to life by playing the anniversary waltz, despite the fact that the song is not even a selection on the device's menu, and the record is not even in the machine. Bobby Mackey's music world. In the spring of 1978, musician Bobby Mackey purchased the building, and it has been in operation ever since. Besides operating as a bar, Bobby Mackey's has a stage and a dance floor and has featured performances by many popular country music acts over the years. Shortly after her husband purchased the building, Janet Mackey was working in the upstairs apartment when she was shoved out of the room towards the stairs while being told to get out by a spirit that she later identified as Alonzo Walling. After that, Janet refused to set foot in the room, so Bobby hired Carl Lawson as a caretaker and allowed him to stay in the apartment. Upon moving in, Lawson reportedly heard strange noises and saw shadowy figures moving around the bar late at night. Believing that the spirits were coming in through the well in the basement, Lawson threw holy water down the hole. As a result, Lawson claimed that he became possessed and was only able to break free from the demon's grasp after an exorcism was performed on him. In 1993, a man sued Bobby Mackey's, alleging that while he was in the bar's men's room, he was punched and kicked by a dark-haired apparition wearing a cowboy hat. The victim stated that he might have angered the ghost because he dared it to appear shortly before being attacked. While the suit was thrown out, it did result in the now famous sign that hangs above the front doors of Bobby Mackey's, which alerts guests to the possibility that the building may be haunted and that they are entering at their own risk. Primetime ghosts. Bobby Mackey repeatedly turned down requests to have his bar investigated. However, in 2008, he allowed the TV show Ghost Adventures to film an episode at his club, which yielded some interesting and controversial footage. Investigators encountered odd cold spots and claimed to have heard the voice of a woman. While using the men's restroom, investigator Nick Groff also heard banging noises, which startled him so much that he ran out of the restroom without zipping up his pants. The team also captured some odd video of what appeared to be a man in a cowboy hat moving around in the basement. But the episode will forever be remembered as the one in which overly dramatic ghost hunter Zach Baggins claimed to have been attacked by a demonic entity after challenging the evil forces in the basement. As proof, Baggins proudly displayed 3 scratch marks on his back. He was so shaken by the event that voice clearly saying, "It hurts." They're waiting for you. While Bobby Mackey states that he does not believe in ghosts and doesn't think that his bar is haunted, reports of paranormal activity continue. So should you ever find yourself sitting at the bar at Bobby Mackey's late at night, make sure you take a look around and keep in mind that just because the bar stool next to you appears to be empty, you may not be drinking alone. And with that, we'll be closing up this chapter of incredible information. We do hope you've enjoyed getting spooky with us today and learning about some of these incredible and historical ghost stories. We hope you'll join us in our upcoming videos where we read more from the book of incredible information and where we also revisit